And David Wilson is joining us in the studio now. It is truly the case that we all remember.
We were talking about this yesterday, David, and we were just saying that me and Rosh were the same age, and we were around that age when this happened.
Yeah.
That it's one of those stories that sticks with you, and whenever you hear the words Josef Fritzl, you're instantly
or see
taken
that
back.
image. That image there, just
his
sort
face.
of... Yeah, it gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? You have been quite close to this story, I know. You've actually been to the town where it all happened.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by what you saw?
Totally. I went out to Amstetten. The Fritzls lived on a house on Ibstrasse, 40 Ibstrasse, and I went out to Amstetten because I thought, oh, Amstetten must be quite quiet, and the Fritzls' house itself must have been set back and slightly
Quite isolated. You do think that, don't you? Yeah.
Whereas, in fact, it was literally in the heart of a busy little town. There was a baker's shop next door, which had a cafe. There was a petrol station across the street. There was a tattoo parlour across the street. In other words, these crimes were being committed in the heart of the community, in front of everybody's eyes.
They say that you truly never know what happens behind closed doors, but this is the extreme. I can imagine that little town, it must have really affected everybody, because it was the story that we found so harrowing to hear.
Yeah,
but
it weren't our town.
Everybody around knowing that this is going on right next door.
Well, what was interesting, Rosh, was that this was a very respectable home. 40 Ibstrasse was very respectable. It was Austrian respectability upstairs.
There it is.
And, of course, Josef Fritzl himself. It was a grand and imposing house, as you can see. And Josef Fritzl himself was somebody who tried to give off an impression successfully for years that he was middle class, he was an engineer, he was involved in the construction industry. And, of course, he was doing his best by his family. He wanted to give that impression. And what's so interesting is that he succeeded for the length of time that he succeeded in carrying off that impression.
And for those people out there, because we were just talking about this before we went on air, there's a few people that work here that are a lot younger than us that didn't even know about this story. Just remind people exactly what he was found out to be doing.
Right. So, I mean, some of the basic facts are distressing. So we know that Josef Fritzl keeps his daughter Elizabeth captive in a specially constructed dungeon below stairs for 24 years. In the VO, I said it was 430 square feet. That's the equivalent of the floor space of a two-car garage.
Yeah.
It's very, very small indeed. He keeps her there for 24 years when she reaches... 24 years when she reaches the age of 18. Eventually, this is going to be uncovered. It's accepted at court. He raped his daughter some 3,000 times. They produced 7 children through this incestuous relationship. One of the children dies, which is why he was convicted of murder. And in 2009, he's going to be given a whole life... he's going to be given a life sentence, but eligible for parole after 15 years.
Which is something to talk about there, because that, I would like to think that wouldn't happen here,
in this
country.
Sentence.
Do you think that sentence was too lenient with the eligibility of parole?
I genuinely thought when he was... I spoke to one of the psychiatrists involved in the case when I was in Austria, and I genuinely believed, as did she, that he would spend the rest of his life in jail.
I think we all did.
I mean, Austria has a very different criminal justice system from our own, and therefore, you know, we're applying our own knowledge of criminal justice and how to gain parole and whether someone's safe to release based on what we think of in England and Wales. But Austria has its own system. But the point is, Ryland, and you were quite right to draw attention to it, he potentially could be released from prison more quickly than he releases his daughter from this hellish downstairs.
Yes, when you think of it like that.
It's frightening.
And there was quite a lot of meticulous planning in this. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act, was it? He was planning this for quite some time.
You're absolutely right, Rosh. And Fritzl had previously been convicted of rape and is actually suspected of other rapes when he was a much younger man. So he learned quite a lot from those previous offences about how not to be caught. Now, remember, he is an engineer, he's a builder, he meticulously plans the kind of space that he's going to keep Elizabeth prisoner within, and that kind of planning. And think of the day-to-day planning. He's got to do 2 loads of grocery shopping.
How did he get away with it for so long? It's just so many questions about it.
He's very criminally sophisticated. Think of the planning. He also is cunning enough to have Elizabeth, when she's being held captive, to write notes. And he would then post the notes.
Almost forward planning.
Forward planning. He would post the notes not from Amstetten, but from Linz, from Vienna, from other places in Austria, which made it appear that Elizabeth had indeed joined a cult, run away, and was having children within the cult, and then leaving these children. This is the bit that always got me, because Fritzl, obviously the children are born. He's going to bring 3 of those children of the 7 upstairs to live with him and Rosemary, his wife. And he would leave
that even happen?
And he's going to leave the child outside on the front doorstep in a box with a note that had been written by Elizabeth, implying that her parents now look after their grandchild. It's very meticulous. This is a very sophisticated offender, and I genuinely think psychopathic.
Well, you say this. However, a judge has decided that he could now go potentially from a high-security prison into a regular prison because it's been claimed he's no longer dangerous. There he is now. Do we think that's the right decision when we look back at this story, when he got away with this for so long? Allegedly now he's no longer dangerous. I didn't realise he had previous than what he did with his own daughter.
And those, the previous convictions were expunged from the public record because of when he committed them. He's 88, he's got dementia, he's walking with a Zimmer frame. He's actually been released from a psychiatric secure unit to a regular prison. With the possibility that he might be eligible for parole in the coming months. Do I think he's less dangerous? No, because I think he's a psychopath. I don't know the kind of psychodynamic treatment that he's been receiving whilst he's in jail. You know, if you're going to change a psychopath's behaviour, you really have got to have an ingrained therapeutic regime that's going to tackle some of those underlying problems.
And we should say you are a massive advocate for rehabilitation.
I totally get rehabilitation. You know, I campaign on behalf of various rehabilitative programs in this country. With Fritzl, you know, not only am I not yet convinced, I also think there's a moral boundary that we have to draw. And, you know, somebody who rapes his own daughter 3,000 times, produces 7 children
keeps her locked in a basement.
And keeps her locked in a basement. I think the moral boundary is, why should we release that person back into society?
And why should his sentence time be less than, you know, the time that he held her in that basement? My question is with Elizabeth. What happens to Elizabeth after this? How does she go on and...
Well, how does she reintegrate herself into
society?
Yeah.
She's done... according to all the reports, you can imagine the Austrians are very careful about guarding her privacy.
So they should be.
According to all the reports, she married one of the police officers that was assigned to protect her after she was released from captivity.
For Elizabeth.
But there is a happier ending for Elizabeth, as opposed to the 6 children who survive, because the 3 that were kept downstairs have all kinds of physiological problems. Remember, there was no natural light.
Yes.
They were having to stoop. There was one of the children was 5'8". He still walks with a stoop because he can't stand up straight. Plus all the psychological problems that they've got. And even the children that were upstairs, as it were, being brought up by Rosemary and Fritzl, their supposed grandparents, even upstairs, those children have got a range of psychological problems related to what they now understand happened to their...
Well, look, the story is just horrendous. We all remember it so well. We'll obviously keep an eye on what goes on there. But really, I think someone like that needs to be banged up for life, to be perfectly honest with you. David, thank you so much for coming in. You always speak so well.